Hello, it's us again, and we are here with
Hello.
you for. I think that there's a certain, to quote the great philosopher, poet, and artist George Lucas, sometimes stories don't repeat, but they do rhyme. So, if you're looking at the latter days of the Roman Empire, a time defined by emperors declaring that they were actually empresses, a time defined by mass decadence, a parasitic elite basically letting the country fall to pieces in order that they could pay no taxes. The Roman legions being replaced by foreign legions of former barbarians given a sword and told to fight for the empire. And given the British ruling class's obsession with this period, it is therefore perhaps no surprise, A, that our show is called Decline and Fall, though this episode has a very special title, which we will reveal as time goes on, but also that the British ruling class would end up repeating so many of the sins of the Greeks and Romans, with whom they are, of course, so obsessed. And joining me in in today's, I think we can call it a dissection of the latest morbid symptom of the decline and fall of the British Empire. It's Kit Clarenberg coming to us from the once and future socialist Yugoslavia.
Hello. It is, a very special episode today because it's not often that we at Decline and Fall have the luxury or the opportunity of being able to really break down into a breaking news story. It's not every week. It is sometimes, and we are currently watching one of the most profoundly weird and inexplicable political scandals of my lifetime unfold in real time. And I refer, of course, to the suspicious arson blitz, emphasis on arse, targeting Keir Starmer. And I, every single day over the past, say, I believe it's about a week, it might be less, we have had bizarre story after bizarre story, adding ever more layers to the proverbial onion of how and why it was three seeming Ukrainian rent boys armed somehow with detailed intelligence on what car Keir Starmer used to drive and where he used to live and lives, attempted a series of arson attacks with some success, and then were promptly arrested. And the usual baying mob of Ukrainian ultras, Russophobic lunatics cited as experts in the media, and other sources who are all too willing and able to blame Russia for anything and spin conspiracy theories, no matter how brain dead. To name just one example, Peter Jukes, the rather unpleasant and inveterately lying editor of Spyline Times, who quite clearly gets briefings from the intelligence services and has, in recent memory, theorized that Rishi Sunak stood down as prime minister because he had been told by MI5 that the race riots that erupted in late 2024 were coming, and he abdicated because he didn't want to be blamed for them and he wanted to blame Starmer, have all remained completely silent on this. You would think that at least one person might try and somehow link this wave of arson attacks one way or another to Russia, but so far, no, not at all.
Kind of hard to do that when it's a bunch of Ukrainian. I think we should call them what they are, which is gentlemen running an enthusiastic startup based on the marketing of their own physical assets. Now, this led to, or maybe this has led to, a bizarre video from Keir Starmer this morning, which I have no real explanation as to what the fuck this is all about. So you, good viewers, and those of you on the audio version, I apologize for this because it is a video clip we're about to play. You, good viewers, can try and make sense of this, and we will try and interpret just what the hell Keir Starmer is doing in this video. All right, let me just put the sound on there.
Yeah, there is no sound. There's no sound. So I was going to say,
where is he going?
For our audio fans, I will describe what's on screen, which is a tweet from Keir Starmer in which he states, "Stepping up, not standing aside," and it's accompanied with a silent 4-second video of him stepping out of what seems to be 10 Downing Street. It is utterly bizarre. I'm not sure who or what he's addressing here, or why he feels the need to reference any prospect of him standing aside, unless it had been put to him by someone. But this is a very, very, very strange clip to issue in the wake of 3, Ukrainian. What terminology did you use, Alex? People who were
they're gentlemen running a startup based on their own physical assets.
Yes. 3 rather young and boyish Ukrainians who seemingly have sensitive information that would not be privy to average members of the public, with which it is very, very, very odd that you would publish this and not a statement on the fact that this has happened.
Well, let's just pause there for a second to go over what exactly has happened here, which is that 3 Ukrainian men have been arrested over the last few days, and they have been arrested on charges of carrying out firebombing attacks on, I believe it's 2 former residences of Keir Starmer, including the house that he used to live in when he was leader of the opposition, which he's currently rented to his sister-in-law, and a former car that Keir Starmer used to own. It was sold to a neighbour when he became Prime Minister, and a former residence of Starmer where he used to live back in the 1990s, which has now been converted into a block of flats. But so this is when he was nominally a lawyer in private practice before he was head of the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service. So that's a lot of information to gather for like 3 early 20s Ukrainian dudes who suddenly carry out a series of arson attacks on the Prime Minister's most recent residence, currently lived in by his sister-in-law, his former car, and a former residence from about 25 to 30 years ago. Now, where on earth? Now, you could conceivably have got the information about Keir Starmer's residence when he was just a constituency MP. Feasibly, that might be public domain if you knew where to look for it. But even that's a stretch. But his former car, that's weird. I mean, how on earth do you find out what former car that the Prime Minister drove, given that he was being chauffeured around when he was leader of the opposition? So this must be a car when he used to do his own driving. A former resident 30 years ago. So I'm going to go out on a limb, Kit, and make a speculative announcement that they didn't get this information themselves. None of these people's first language is English. Like, they are relatively new to the country. And even if they've been here a few years, it still takes you a while to absorb, like, how to get around London, for instance, and find places. I still find it confusing, and I used to work there. So this is a very strange series of events. And here is how one of these arson attacks was reported on the Sun newspaper's website. So we can see here. I'm just going to play this clip. This is benefit of the audio listeners. This is a car suddenly exploded on Keir Starmer's former street. So it was his house just down the road from where Starmer still legally owns the property. And the Sun's clip online over the menacing music, the text says, it comes after 2 other incidents saw properties in North London linked to Sir Keir set on fire in suspected firebomb attack. So this is all very, very strange. And had this happened a few years back, and had the names of the attackers been, say, for instance, Mohammed bin something, then we may well have a very different media atmosphere. As it is, you have this sort of muted reporting of it in like the Guardian newspaper, which just submitted a very short report on this from Vikram Dodd, their police and crime correspondent, which you can read in less than 30 seconds. It's that short.
Yeah.
So here, Kit, you as somebody who's reported very extensively both on the British security state and its relationship with the media, I'll throw to you and ask exactly what the fuck is this?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that what's very, very, very weird about this is that, yes, there has been intense media interest in this, but very little detail. So after the first Ukrainian twink was arrested, and his father was interviewed and said, "Oh, my son loves the UK, and he's lived there for a number of years." It was reported that a second individual, their nationality and identity was not revealed, had been arrested in connection with these offences. And then, yes, there was this third arrest. The media claimed this person, his name is Stanislav Karapuch, is Romanian. Now, if you look at his still extant, or at least it was when I archived it, profile on Star Now, which is for models and actors to post profiles and try and get work, it is quite clear that, yes, Stanislav is he was seeking one way or another to make a dime based on his looks. There are various photos of him looking suggestive, etc. And it's quite clear that his grasp of the English language was, to say the least, subpar. So he says in his About Me section, "My name's Stanislav. I was born in the west of Ukraine in small town Chervenitsy. I started my modeling career quite recently. I wish to enter in top of male model in the world." So again, I mean, if you were assembling a crack squad of arsonists, maybe not someone you would seek to recruit, oddly, let alone free male models. Very, very, very odd. Now, there is another aspect to this that I find very suspicious, which is this kind of bizarrely juxtaposed media frenzy along with total lack of detail or any real delving into the backgrounds of these people or any other basic questions being asked about how they acquired this information, this sensitive information on Starmer, and indeed whether they were just working alone, and if so, why, or if they weren't working alone, who they were doing this on behalf of. I might add that this is something that I believe that you and I have spoken about a long time before, and it's something I've done podcasts on. But Britain, it has a very effective means of press censorship called the DSMA Committee, which is the Defence and Security Media Advisory Committee. And now it is a Ministry of Defence run body filled with MI5 and MI6 and military people who basically tell the media what they can and can't report on and how on matters of national security. Now, this story quite clearly falls under the purview of national security. As you say, if this was 10 years ago and the perpetrators happened to not have white skin, we would probably have blanket media coverage, lots of delving into their backgrounds, all sorts of speculations about their motives, and it would be branded unambiguously an act of terrorism. Okay. Yes. The DSMA committee routinely publishes minutes of its meetings with the heads of major media outlets. Now, in its minutes of its November 2024 meeting, its most recent meeting, there is one of the first items states that over the past 6 months, we issued a D notice, which basically means do not publish, related to Gaza and Lebanon. It was concerned with protecting individuals deployed in small numbers in the region. This proved effective, and the story of concern was not repeated, which is to say that the British media, at the British government's direct request, didn't go near the fact, the completely unambiguous and undeniable fact that British forces are directly involved in the Gaza genocide. Okay. So, and again, they openly boast that our intervention proved effective and the story of concern was not repeated. So, if the DSMA committee wanted to, and the powers that be wanted to, and MI5 and MI6 and the British elite wanted this story buried, they could do it very easily. But they haven't done this. So we must ask ourselves why, and who wants this on, why they want this in the public domain, and who is benefiting from this, and whether there is an ultimate end goal to, one way or another, harm Starmer. I initially speculated, and I don't enjoy speculating, let alone admitting when I've gotten it wrong, tongue in cheek. I speculated initially that, well, we've had a spate of alleged arson attacks by Russia in Europe, saying German authorities and Polish authorities have recently blamed Russia for firebombing incidents on industrial facilities and factories. We also had in the US not long ago a US neo-Nazi teenager who was being directed by unknown elements in Ukraine to assassinate the president, to blame it on Russia. I speculated, was this an attempt to blame, to carry out a series of firebombing attacks to blame on Russia? That doesn't seem to be the agenda here.
Well, just to interject, the funny thing about this is, like, they could have easily made these guys into something that they're not. So they could have easily put together a story saying that these had been influenced by online bad actors from originating in Russia, that they've been radicalized online. God knows they've used that fucking story loads of times to justify complete bullshit, nonsensical, like stories about like Islamic terrorism and stuff like that. They could have easily have said that. They didn't. They must have all those stories ready to go on the shelf, and they didn't use them.
Yeah.
So my question is then, I mean, there's never any one single motivation for a state machine to do something. Each state machine has many different factions within it, some of whom are pro-Labour Party, some of whom are vehemently anti-Labour Party and anti-Starmer. The military and intelligence side is probably pretty divided between pro and anti-Starmer factions. I would say that, like, if there was a bunch of Ukrainian fascists in Britain who were looking to carry out attacks on political figures, Keir Starmer would be at the very bottom of that list, because he's so rabidly in favor of aiding the Banderites and carrying on the war. So, like, that's clearly not the motivation, whatever the motivation is. So I think the reason why some of the people inside the British security establishment have decided to let this story out there and let it fester and let it be speculated about in the online media is precisely because some of them have decided that Keir Starmer has passed his sell-by date, and this is as good a way as any as base of like slowly undermining him. And this is the whole thing could really be some sort of operation designed to lever him out, or it could be that they found, shall we say, some gentleman with a grudge or possibly unpaid bills that were willing to go and do this in return for maybe certain promises that were made to them. I don't know. With the added bonus that it would basically make Starmer look incredibly guilty, and that he would respond in a very ill-advised way by doing a bizarre video, just makes him look more and more weird. So it would seem to me that Starmer has delivered upon certain things that his handlers wanted. which is that he delivered upon the final destruction of like the Labour Party left. He delivered that. He's delivered solidly the continuation of the Ukraine war, which is what the British ruling class was most animated about. He's delivered that. He's essentially removed all opposition to its continuation within the Labour Party. And now he's delivered for the other part of the coalition that was behind him, which is essentially it's effectively nullified the Brexit vote via a bureaucratic maneuver with the European Union. Now he's done those things. I think he's basically finished. He has no more utility for these people anymore, and he can be disposed of. He probably won't want to be disposed of, which is why they've had to come up with something like this. That's speculation, but I'll throw back to you, Kit, for your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does. I wholeheartedly agree, and I think the I mean, on the subject of speculation, I mean, I think this seems deliberately custom built to generate speculation, and it also comes after there's rumor and innuendo about Starmer's relationship with his clothes designer. A gay member of the House of Lords. It all just seems weird by design. And like it's the kind of thing that anyone with an ounce of sense knew would inspire a wide amount of conjecture, all sorts of conspiracy theorizing, and it's like they've given people just enough red meat to play with in terms of coming up with different scenarios and theories as to who these people were and why they were doing this. And with the kind of scintilla of a suggestion that maybe Starmer might have owed them some money for services rendered, possibly. It's very, very strange. And another aspect of this as well, which is like, again, that I find quite interesting, is that when they announced the arrest and charge of Stanislav, future West top model, they noted that he was arrested at Luton Airport. So he was quite clearly trying to do a runner. But they haven't disclosed where he was going to. Again, if his name was Mohammed and he was en route to Pakistan, would be, and I think Craig Murray has two very recent blog posts on which are must read on MI5 and MI6's history of cooking up fake terror plots, and their recent focus, the recent focus of MI5 seems to be stoking or cooking up fake plots involving Iranians, and there are several people who've been arrested allegedly for spying or plotting for Iran, and there's zero serious evidence that this is the case. So it's like, but they have, again, drip fed some kind of scintillating, somewhat suspicious information into the public domain about these people in order to convict them before they reach trial. This hasn't happened here, but there's been a modicum of information. And yes, the lack of official statements on this from MI5, from any government official is really, really, really bizarre. And you've got to think that I mean, major newspapers, given their chummy relationship with the government, will have been seeking briefings and taking briefings on how to report this and what they can and can't say. So it feels very, very stage managed. And I might add as well that, I mean, on the subject of Starmer's utility, I mean, I think we've discussed this before, but I mean, I think that, and I think I've said pretty consistently that since the start of this year, that Starmer, with his pledges of supporting Ukraine as long as it takes, his 100-year deal with Kiev signed aligned personally with Zelensky, and then all of the months of tub thumping about how he was ready and willing and able to deploy British troops to Ukraine before, as we discussed in a previous episode, suddenly pulling off this reverse ferret where the British were never going to do this, never planned to, and it was all France's idea, and which they were never on board with. I do think that he has put himself at such a high level in terms of Ukraine that there's no getting out of this now without his removal. And also as well, I think that, and we'll get into this in due course, there has been a major tonal shift on Gaza in recent weeks, with major Western publications, including the Financial Times and, amazingly, The Economist, which is about the most rabidly Zionist media outlet in the UK, which is saying something. The editorial boards of multiple major mainstream publications have openly called Gaza a genocide. They have condemned Starmer for his continued support of it. There was that Tory MP whose I believe it was Mark Pritchard, who gave a speech in the House of Commons saying that he'd supported Israel at all costs for decades, but he got it wrong and publicly withdrew his support for Israel, which was extraordinary. There was another amazing incident I highlighted where another Conservative MP, Kit Malthouse, he challenged Hamish Faulkner, who is ex-MI6 and is also the son of another certain Faulkner who helped lead Britain into the Iraq War. Malthouse asked him what advice he and Keir Starmer's government had received for when the reckoning comes, which was like fiery stuff to say in Parliament, and it went viral. So I think that, I mean, on issues where the mainstream establishment is at least trying to give the appearance of pulling away from the Gaza genocide, there are indications that Trump is at least temporarily sidelining Israel in order to try and disentangle the US from various problems it itself has created in West Asia. Keir Starmer is kind of left alone in being all in on Ukraine, despite having withdrawn all of his cast iron pledges to deploy there. And it's also just reached the point as well where nobody takes him seriously or is listening to him. All of his, as we've discussed last week, all of his mainstream fluffers who were heralding his election as the second coming of Christ have abandoned him. The poll after poll shows that reform is more popular than Labour, that people favour Nigel Farage over Keir Starmer. So his goose is pretty comprehensively cooked, and what better way to get rid of him than stoke up a very strange controversy like this?
Yes, and the other point, and we've made this point before, but the entire career of Keir Starmer, from his earliest emergence into public life in the 1980s as a student, has been defined, I would say, by his very interesting relationship with the security services. He is a rather bland man, from the pages of a Le Carre novel, because, as you pointed out to me a while ago, Czech intelligence in the communist era had him down as a British intelligence asset when he was visiting Czechoslovakia in the 1980s. So this is a guy who's dedicated his entire life to the service of the British security state. That's how he got his job in the CPS. That's how he became head of the CPS. And his job involves not, as he claims, prosecuting people traffickers or anything like that. It involves covering things up. It involves doing the stuff like covering up the Jimmy Savile scandal and its links to the political media and security establishment, covering up all manner of other things, all manner of other dirty deeds of the British security state and the British political establishment. That's his job. That was his job. And then he was brought into Parliament, partly maybe because of his own ambition, but also because the British security state wanted somebody reliable at the top of the Labour Party, and they got him in the end. Now his masters have decided that he's expended his usefulness. He will be disposed of. The only question is whether he goes quietly or whether he's decided that he's started to believe his own hype and that he's some sort of genius. In which case, this scandal will be juiced up further, I would say. More suggestions will be leaked into the public domain about Starmer's predilections, and he will be told that unless he goes quietly and in a statesman-like fashion, then more stuff will come out, whether it's real or not. Because as Lyndon Johnson once said, that we can at least make the son of a bitch deny it with regards to rumours about the political opponents, so shall we say proclivities. So if you could imagine Keir Starmer on the steps of Downing Street saying, I did not have intimate relations with those male models, the only thing people are going to hear is the latter part of the sentence, which is intimate relations with male models, you know?
Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of memes saying I'm not gay, my boyfriend is. But I mean, I do think that that he's someone who's quite clearly been protected every step of the way. He has done an enormous amount of work to assist MI5 and MI6 and the British establishment more generally, like insulating Jimmy Savile from prosecution, insulating MI5 and MI6 officials from prosecution. Tens of thousands of pages amassed in specific operatives within both agencies related to their direct involvement in CIA torture, and the CPS decided there was insufficient evidence to charge them. I think on top of having done the necessary favors in order to get to the position that he's in, he's also racked up a few debts in his time as well to these people, and he's also probably been compromised one way or another. I mean, to give you an example, like Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, he's been sanctioned by the US, therefore completely neutralizing the ICC probe of Netanyahu in Israel for genocide in Gaza and crimes against humanity. But he's also on administrative leave due to alleged sexual assault and harassment of female co-workers. Now, I've made this point before, and I'll make it again. He could well be guilty. They could have just been held this dirt on him and waited until they felt it necessary to deploy it. This is a guy who, and I would urge our listeners to check out our epic and can't miss 2-part special on the breakup of Yugoslavia. Karim Khan cut his teeth working for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which, as we discussed at length, would be an insult to kangaroos to call a kangaroo court. And relied heavily on potentially tainted evidence provided by the CIA and MI6. So it's like, the possibility that, yes, that there are skeletons in his cupboard and also skeletons in Starmer's cupboard that, now the time has come to fling those cupboard doors open and let the world see.
Yes, and this is why they prefer deeply compromised individuals to rise to the top, because you can pull the plug on them at any time. I mean, there is, the American journalist Whitney Webb has written extensively about this with reference to the Epstein scandal. You've written about this before. Like the more compromised and the worse the dirt is, the better. I mean, this is one of the things about all of these institutions, whether it's the British government or the Catholic Church. The more compromised and the more repulsive the dirt is, the better. And that's why let these people who are guilty of often very serious crimes rise to the top, because they are completely controllable. You can pull the plug on them at any moment, and they know that, which is also why, I mean, just to venture into the realm of psychology for a moment, why is it that we think that Keir Starmer is so weird, so stiff, so utterly inhuman in everything that he does? That's the psychological makeup of a man who has been lying about everything, probably since the age of about 15 or 16, and who everything about him is fake, everything about him is curated, everything about his life has been manufactured by MI5 and MI6 operatives and military intelligence men, and his life has been given in service to them. So that's why apparently, like, he's a massive drinker. That's why he seems so strange. This is a man who's been living a life of 50, almost 50 years. What if impact do we think that that has, other than chronic delusions, wild alcoholism, and of course, perhaps certain proclivities which would disgrace a man were they to become public? But I have danced around this long enough. I'm not going to make the obvious gag that Mr. Galloway made on his broadcast the other day. Shall we move on to the not so much Keir Starmer, but very much an area of interest for Keir Starmer, which is of course the Ukraine war.
Yeah, and I think as well. We're now moving from the realm of the speculative to the concrete, which is always a welcome shift, I think.
Yes. Now, of course, Trump had his much anticipated conversation with Putin, and I'm going to put the Truth Social post up here on screen so viewers can see it, which is essentially a typical Trump statement in that it boasts an awful lot about stuff which either doesn't exist or has like already happened. And Putin essentially, in his statement about the discussion with Trump, essentially repeated what he's been saying for almost a year, which is that the Russian position on how to end the war was outlined in June of 2024 in a speech that Putin gave to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he outlined very, very clearly that the what he calls the underlying issues have to be resolved. The underlying issues being NATO expansion, being the imposed Banderite regime in Ukraine, which has sat there for 10 years now, 11 years now, and of course the attempts to pull Ukraine into NATO by the US, by the British in particular, also by the Germans. And this is what needs to be addressed. Trump, of course, doesn't say anything about that. He spends half of the Truth Social post telling everyone about who he spoke to immediately afterwards, all of whom, including, of course, Meloni, Macron, Merz, Stubb of Finland, all of whom are sort of rabidly in favor, one way or another, of continuing the war. And so Trump essentially announces a big nothing, and Putin essentially comes out and says, the position remains what it is, and what it has been for well over a year now, possibly longer. And I would say also that not only should everybody read the Ministry of Foreign Affairs speech that Putin gave when he outlined the way to solve the conflict, but also should go back and read the two treaties that the government of the Russian Federation submitted to NATO and the US in the back end of 2021, so almost 4 years ago now, which call for NATO to essentially withdraw its forces from east of Berlin back to the dividing line that was there when Germany was unified back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, back to the commitments that were made on paper by George H.W. Bush and James Baker III. And that essentially the machinery of NATO in the east of Europe be dismantled. They haven't retreated from those demands. Those demands are still there. Now, my argument would be Trump cannot and will not satisfy those demands. If he tried to, well, maybe the next Ukrainian teenager doesn't mess. And certainly the Europeans and the British aren't going to allow it either. So this is essentially Trump bragging about absolutely nothing, and the position remains essentially the same. But Kit, I'll now. That's my interpretation of this phone call and these events. But what's yours?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always thought that it was a much hullabaloo about nothing, because and what I found quite interesting was that some of the takes that I witnessed from that I came across from Ukrainian ultras and, you know, quote unquote defense experts who literally get everything wrong the whole time, was that they claimed that you know, Russia isn't talking about NATO membership for Ukraine as being a factor very much anymore. That shows that this was never about Ukraine joining NATO, and always about, you know, imperial delusions and Russian expansion and blah blah blah. No, the reason that they're not talking very much about NATO anymore is that their position remains unchanged. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, and also, but the fact of the matter is that neutrality for Ukraine de facto means no NATO membership. Okay, I think as well that the as you mentioned, the position of Russia on NATO expansion into Europe has been very, very, very clear, like, for a very long time. And I do think that, I mean, to give Romania, you know, as an example, like, I mean, we've just had a basically sham election where some centrist hack won, and quote unquote Europe breathed a sigh of relief because, you know, the right candidate, i.e. pro-war, pro-NATO, pro-West, won from a field of equally god-awful candidates with exactly the same positions on everything. Like, you know, it is necessary for the West to maintain these puppets in countries like Romania, because they need to use them as effective NATO launch pads and fill them full of NATO missiles at enormous expense, when the public doesn't want this. Right, so I mean, I'm reminded of there was a BBC article in the wake of the overturning of Romania's November election, in which saw Calin Georgescu, who be robbed of victory when he was on the verge of prevailing in the first round of voting, on completely bogus grounds. There was a BBC report that quoted a NATO apparatchik who said, you know, well, we dodged a bullet, but there are real problems here, and, you know, if something isn't done about them, we're going to have you know, even more problems on our hands. I mean, you know, I think that the increasingly European opinion is actually shifting in favor of Russia's position on this. And I think as well that I wrote about this on my website, again, shameless plug, is that, like, you know, we are seeing increasingly from both from mainstream media reporting and the various emanations of Western officials, that they're kind of getting to grips with the fact that the US cavalry won't come to the rescue if they're attacked by Russia, which, you know, Russia won't do unless they attack them. They are also understanding that the US cavalry was never meant to come to the rescue in the first place, was never going to, and is actually NATO is actually a means of ensuring US domination over the continent. You know, it is the US is the most powerful power in Europe, and it's not even a European power, right? Yeah. So it's like, I can see, I can foresee increasingly, like, not only public but potentially state level alignment with what Russia is demanding. Now, yes, as you say, these demands are basically non-negotiable from Russia's perspective, and they're unchanging. And it's been quite remarkable about the seeing the kind of mainstream media response to this as you know, you know, as somehow this is a sign of Russian intransigence and just, you know, determination to wipe Ukraine off the map. You know, the agreements are very clear. They require a signature. They wouldn't take much to enforce. It would typically require not doing things. You know, rather than doing things. You know, where's the intransigence there? you know, on just reasonably demanding that a hostile foreign military bloc stops pushing up to your borders and engaging in provocative actions towards you.
Mm. Well, this is the thing. It's like the demand. This is what happens when you essentially ignore and trample all over requests from the Russians that have been made going all the way back to the late 90s.
Yeah.
And those two treaties that they came up with at the end of 2021 represented years again of like being ignored, being lied to, being told basically to fuck off, and having plots against them waged by the British and the Americans in Georgia, in Armenia, all kinds of, and we haven't even got into the maneuvers of the British in Central Asia over the last 40 years. That would be probably a series of shows in and of themselves. But and then mostly, and of course, in Ukraine, which was the big one. And so eventually, after many years, by the way of trying to avoid doing this, the Russian government was pushed into the special military operation. And as even the New York Times was obliged to report on recently, Russian soldiers who did comment on this said, well, we are tired of the war, but we're not willing to sell out. We're not willing to stop until this has been prosecuted to victory. And here we return to a point that you and I have talked about over and over again, which is the willingness of the British to let the entirety of Ukraine burn, basically, and drag out the war for as long as they possibly can in order to cause the Russians as much damage as possible, which includes forcing the Russians to go all the way up to Western Ukraine, in order purely that the war can be spun out and the British can plausibly claim that victory is just around the corner, rather than having to confront this defeat and massive, disastrous failure. So this is the game that's being played. And again, I will repeat what I've said ad nauseum, which is this is why the Kiev regime can't be negotiated with. As Putin himself observed in 2021, like it has no agency. It's just a sort of front for the US and the British principally. So what are you negotiating with? You're not negotiating with Zelensky. He has no agency. He is an actor saying prepared lines. So this whole thing is a farce. And to be quite blunt, some people who I won't name in the multipolar commentary sphere should really know better than to treat every utterance of Trump as some kind of step forward for peace. It is not. It is just Trump waffling and wavering all over the place, which is his style.
Yeah, and I might add as well that like one of the most interesting things from that the Truth Social post is it doesn't reference him having Trump having consulted Keir Starmer or Britain. He says, I've informed Zelensky, I've informed Ursula in Brussels, I've informed Macron, Maloney, Friedrich Merz, and even the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb, following my call with Putin, the Vatican, but he hasn't told Starmer. You know, and I think as well that one of the as we have again discussed ad infinitum, is I think that there is another aspect to this now, which is that the US is genuinely sick of this conflict and wants it over, and I think that they probably see a lot of opportunity in cutting deals with Russia on resources, all sorts of things. But the plan probably from day one was, and I think Biden as good as said so on several occasions, was at one point to basically shunt this over to Europe. But Europe is so completely disarmed and so completely powerless and impotent at this point that this can't be done. So it's like, well, we want to wash our hands of this, but and hand it over to someone else and let them take the fall for it. But also we can't, because they're getting all of their weapons from us. It's this, they're stuck in this terrible infinity loop, and I think that there is still, I think that we discussed this before, but I think it's kind of 1930s British Empire, like desperately clinging on to this notion that, well, we're still number one, we're still powerful, and yet we're going to kind of pull back from that on our own terms, right?
Yes.
And it's like, but it's like, the terms are being dictated by others quite clearly now. And I do think as well that, yes, that it does appear that the Russians themselves are, not overly thrilled that it's been going on this long, but they are absolutely determined that victory is achieved. And there's also the fact that that there has been messaging from Putin and other Russian officials to both Trump but also Zelensky, is the deal that we are presenting to you is the best deal that you are going to get. And if you don't accept it, the next time that we put a deal to you, the terms will be worse. And they've been saying this since the very beginning,
yes.
Right? And so it's like, once these are rejected, which they will be, because Zelensky realizes that he's going to be probably sodomized on live TV with a bayonet a la Gaddafi if he's lucky, if he's not spirited away to London first. That he's not going to back down, because that's him being killed in a horrible way, and there's probably a lot of dirt is going to come out on what the British and elements of the American intelligence and military community were doing in Ukraine. We've already had some disclosures on that front. It is a deeply toxic house of cards that Zelensky and his Western backers are determined to hold in place in Kiev. So it's just going to keep grinding on, I fear. At the same time, we are seeing absolutely massive Russian advances at the moment, and I think that they are edging every single day, and I mean, edging is undercooking it a bit. They are rapidly making inroads towards major Ukrainian cities again, and at a time when Ukraine's forces appear to be, on the verge of collapse, or struggling enormously to replenish themselves. So, I mean, I think, as we discussed last week, there's going to be a big summer offensive. Where that will leave us is anybody's guess. It could mean obliteration of Ukraine's forces and then renewed peace talks, or we could be talking about maybe the seizure of Odessa and Kharkov, if not other oblasts.
Yes, which has been on the cards now for quite some time. And I think the more that the Ukrainian regime screams that they won't negotiate. I mean, Zelensky came out the other day with another statement that there will be no backing down, which basically means that his British handlers have told him, you better come out and say there's going to be no backing down. You keep this hard line up, basically, because otherwise then, well, you might not get to leave for that mansion in London that we've got ready for you, but only if you obey our instructions to the letter, which is what is going on here. Now, you spoke there of a house of cards, Kit. Perhaps we should turn to another house of cards, which is, of course, the house of cards that was the Biden administration.
Yes.
Which I think is very instructive as to what bourgeois politics in the Western world actually consists of, which is pre-scripted unreality. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, it came out this week that Biden has a long-running and particularly nasty form of prostate cancer, has had it for quite some time, and that this was known to everybody in the Democratic Party hierarchy when they decided that they were initially at least going to try and run him again, and that this farce played out on the television screens, but it also reveals something much deeper than that, which is that the Biden team were essentially running a Potemkin presidency for the entirety of his time in office. And I'm going to just share here an article that you put in the show notes from The Hill, revealing that there was no president. The cabinet meetings were scripted. Like the camera angles were like played with. The reporters, much like the reporters in Britain, were told what they could and couldn't say. They edited everything Biden said that was potentially negative or would reveal his various different ailments, which, I mean, God knows what cocktail of drugs they must have had him on for public appearances. This reveals something very fundamental about the US imperial state right now, which is that the office of president can be literally empty and it doesn't matter, because it was empty. There's no way that this man was running anything. He was being essentially led around by the hand by various handlers and pushed into positions where he made statements. But there was no Joe Biden. Joe Biden, as he once existed, has not been present since before the election he supposedly won. So this is very damning and tells us a lot. It's about far more than Biden. It's about the fact that the office of president can be empty for 4 years and essentially it doesn't change anything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like, I mean, what's quite remarkable is that these revelations come from a book that's co-authored by Jake Tapper, who is like one of the absolute worst pro-Democrat CNN propagandists imaginable. So, like, I mean, I think that lends it lends these revelations, if you can even call them that, pronounced potency. And I think that the details are really quite extraordinary. That even in meetings after the media had left the room and Biden was having quote unquote conversations with other White House staff and representatives of other government departments, he continued to rely on cards and scripts, and in fact relied on them more heavily when reporters were absent. It's just, and this adds to like this growing mass of exposés that have kind of flooded out since he left office. Now, I mean, bearing in mind that in the lead up, when there was questions over the summer over whether he should run again, we were told by every mainstream source imaginable that he was sharp as a tack. That was the stock line used over and over again, when in reality he had to use teleprompters at fundraisers in private homes. It's just I think that it just amply demonstrates how utterly empty theatre US politics is. And I mean, of course, it was abundantly clear on the campaign trail in 2019 that Biden's brain had basically melted. He gave numerous kind of incomprehensible statements, made all sorts of bizarre remarks, would struggle to maintain his concentration during a 2-minute long address to camera. It's just it was abundantly clear. Now, I've included in the show notes a part of an interview with Jake Tapper where he goes into these the details on this. Now, I think play the clip if you could.
I'll play this now.
Yeah, thanks.
Why wasn't this something that was reported about Joe Biden and this cognitive decline? Why wasn't this reported in real time? And obviously, people have criticized you in the book, have said, why didn't you report it in real time?
So there were people reporting on what they saw. The conservative media was, to their credit, all over this. Now, they didn't have insider information, but they were just making sense of all the clips and all of the weird moments and off-putting moments.
Well, so basically he has admitted there that as long as the White House insiders continued to deny this, then Jake Tapper, as a loyal propagandist, would continue to deny it as well. When the insiders brought their own books out and basically threw Biden under the bus, that's when the media can report on something. And this actually relates back to the D-notice stuff in Britain as well, because what you find about censorship regimes in the imperialist countries is that the truth does come out, but it comes out at a time when it can't do as much damage. So what you've got to do isn't try and bury it completely. You've got to delay it until like the key decisions can be made. So if it had come out in 2019 that Biden essentially had no brain, that everything was being like pre-scripted for him, that he didn't have the ability to exercise the powers of the office of president at all. If that had been properly reported on, then his campaign would have withered away. Either he'd have lost the primary or he'd have certainly lost the general election to Trump, which whatever one might say of him, certainly wants to exercise the powers of the presidency, even if he's not able to do it very well. Now, this is why they engage in like this aggressive censorship regime. It's to make sure that the truth gets delayed to the point in coming out, to the point where it doesn't harm established interests anymore.
Yes, no, precisely. And I think, I mean, there is this aspect of, I mean, we see it with Starmer now. We see it with the Gaza genocide now. There's a consensus shift, and when the consensus shift happens, nobody wants to be the last person who is clinging to the consensus. So the tone on Starmer's now shifted. So everyone's now throwing him under the bus because they don't want to be the last holdout on past it. Keir Starmer, right? No one wants to be the last person saying what Israel is doing in Gaza isn't a genocide when the FT and Tory MPs are saying it's genocide. Okay. Yeah. But also I think that particular clip is so, despite the fact it's very brief, it is, and I'm sure that that was not fully intentional on Tapper's part. I think it's because he lacks the requisite self-awareness to understand how seismic what he just said or what he said was, which is that he said, yes, that the conservative media was reporting on Biden's cognitive decline because they were just making sense of all the clips and all of the weird moments and off-putting moments in the public domain. Okay, so they were reporting on what was very clear to everyone who was paying any attention, whereas the non quote unquote conservative media, the liberal, the New York Times and the Washington Post, they were getting insider information, which is much more important than the evidence of your eyes and your ears. Of course, when you're a mainstream client journalist, they were being told, well, no, this is all rubbish. Biden is, yes, sharp as a tack. He is on form. He's in charge. He knows what he's doing. And because they're getting this insider information and they feel like they're part of the special club getting this info, they felt confident reporting it. Now, I even recall, I can't remember who it was, but there was, after Biden stood down, there was a fairly prominent journalist who said that they felt betrayed because they'd been told all along by White House officials that Biden was fine. When he clearly wasn't, and they felt betrayed and lied to. And it's like, it strongly points to the fact that these people who occupy influential positions within the mainstream media, they are incredibly naive and stupid, and they will believe what they are told, and they won't challenge it. Not purely out of a desire, out of a kind of professional need not to lose their sources or piss off the people they get all their information from, but because they actually believe this stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely unreal, and it's like, and I think that if you bear in mind that I remember very well all of the hype that attended Joe Biden's election, and how significant this was, and how we're back to business as usual, but it's going to be better, and we're going to have FDR 2.0. The Hill, again, yes, as you have on screen, published this article called "Is Joe Biden Clark Kent or Superman?" And it contains this amazing passage which states that one of the overriding challenges for Biden's foreign policy will be closing the gulf between the perceptions of American decline and the reality of its increase in absolute power. Now here we are with the Trump administration having been defeated again in the Red Sea by Ansar Allah. We have had in the intervening time, we've had the embarrassing withdrawal and total collapse of the Afghan puppet government that cost however many billions and 20 years building. We've had foreign policy disaster after foreign policy disaster. The US's military weakness has been relentlessly exposed, both by its failure to crush a relatively unsophisticated resistance group in the poorest country in the world twice in the space of a year. All of its much vaunted Wunderwaffe has been proven to be crap in the Ukraine proxy war. And we're also, I think, that we're seeing, as we shall get into, the Trump administration seems to have changed course very radically on Iran, having gone from, before taking office, talking about how they were going to apply maximum pressure again and dole out punishment to the country and bankrupt the Islamic Republic. Now they seem to be pushing, and very, very eagerly, for a peace deal. So much for the increase in absolute power of the American empire.
Well, yes, and I think we should just mention in passing here, as we've got in the show notes, the report from DropSite, which confirms what everybody said at the time, which is that the Biden administration never pressured Israel towards a ceasefire for a single second. This was always bullshit. And again, the concern was, first of all, to avoid being blamed for the genocide, but also to make sure that the stability of the state of Israel. And if the state of Israel required a genocide to stabilize itself, then that is what the Biden administration would allow it to do. And remember what Joe Biden said back on the floor of the Senate all the way back in the middle of the 1980s. If there were not an Israel, we would need to create an Israel to secure our interests in the region. So that's Biden, whether he had a brain or not, would have been doing the same thing. But it's much broader than that. It's about the priorities of the American ruling class. And the priorities of the American ruling class are to stabilize and secure their key asset in the region, which is the state of Israel. And that was their overriding concern, not the mass slaughter of Palestinians. And no matter what, like Ocasio-Cortez and the other completely inveterate liars on the so-called left of the Democratic Party said was going on, that anybody would consider voting for any of these people ever again, if you regard yourself as some sort of progressive. You have no right to call yourself that if you're going to continue to lap up this bullshit that these people have been serving you.
Yeah, and I mean, call it bloody-minded optimism, but I do think that there is a wider rejection of electoral politics in the US, which could lead to people looking at alternative means of political activism and trying to achieve change, because it is. I mean, yes, you mentioned AOC, who had the temerity to claim that Kamala Harris was working tirelessly for a ceasefire, which was a barefaced lie. It was also a barefaced lie that numerous White House officials endlessly reiterated throughout the Gaza genocide while Biden was in office. But I might add as well that, like, you've got to bear in mind that one of the reasons that Biden won, if he even did win in 2020, I'm increasingly of the mind that the election was somehow stolen. what he owed in large part his victory, or to a large number of quote unquote left figures within the Democratic Party claiming that they were going to make his life hell in office and push him left. AOC, Bernie, they all said, yeah, we're gonna push him for Medicaid for all. We're going to make his life hell. We're going to get left-wing candidates elected. We're going to block anything that gets proposed that isn't sufficiently left-wing enough for us. Progressives, put a closed peg over your nose and vote for Biden. Come on, we need to get him in office. And then you fast forward a few months, and AOC is saying, well, he's doing a fantastic job for all Americans.
Yes.
I think it's like people are not going to get fooled by this ever again.
Well,
and I think
you would hope not.
Well, you would, yeah, you would hope not, but I do. I mean, maybe it's the result of the kind of circles I move in. But I know several Americans personally who were taken in by Bernie and were taken in by the squad, who have completely rejected them and would absolutely never vote Democrat again in their lives. As a result. So I mean, I think that such as the American political system, you do have two choices when voting. Well, there are many alternatives to voting.
Many alternatives, and of course, the alternatives that will be necessary for all of us to take in the end when it becomes clear that there's no voting your way out of this. Now, talking of the predictions that we got right, we will now turn to the swirling vortex of chaos that imperialism has, of course, unleashed in West Asia. And I'm referring to, of course, principally, and to start off with, the chaos within Syria, which, as discussed on previous episodes, was trending towards not stability, but a renewal of civil war. And that the HTS gang that the imperialism brought into power in Syria would not be capable of solidifying itself. And now it would seem that Secretary of State of the United States, a certain Marco Rubio, agrees with us. So let's start off this next section by hearing from Little Marco, as Trump used to call him.
The bad news is that the transitional authority figures, they didn't pass their background check with the FBI, okay? They've got a tough history and one that we understand. But on the flip side of it is, if we engage them, it may work out, it may not work out. If we did not engage them, it was guaranteed to not work out. In fact, it is our assessment that, frankly, the transitional authority, given the challenges they're facing, are maybe weeks, not many months, away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war of epic proportions, basically the country splitting up. The good news is that there is a Syrian national identity. It is one of the places in the Middle East where Alawis and Druze and Christians and Sunni and Shia have lived and Kurds have lived alongside each other underneath the banner of a Syrian identity until it was broken by a butcher, Assad, who pitted them against each other. So they face a number of challenges. The bad news is...
Well, let's just stop that there and say that that's, of course, so there's a couple of laughable statements in there. That he says there's a Syrian national identity. There was. It was one that was tied to Syrian nationalism, as personified in the figures of Assad's father and himself. And who broke that apart? Well, it was imperialism and its proxies via their war that they waged for well over a decade on Syria, which eventually succeeded in collapsing the state due to the influence of the Gulf states within that state, as it turned out. So Rubio, of course, is talking shit there, and he says that the forces headed by Jelani or Al-Sharaa or whoever the fuck he is, Alistair Campbell's favorite podcasting partner, face collapse within a few weeks. Well, not exactly a surprise, given that all they've done since they got into power is destroy the infrastructure of Syria and continually attack minority communities. I mean, you and I, again, to plug our Yugoslavia episodes, covered that this is exactly what the proxies of imperialism were doing in Yugoslavia to effectively destroy it. I would say that the fallback option for imperialism, if they can't have a puppet state in Syria, is to have it collapse into several different microstates, which they will then find easier to control. But what's your analysis of the situation, Keir?
Well, yes. I mean, number one, one of the reasons that Assad was actually very popular, and there was a huge anti-Arab Spring movement in Syria before all of the CIA and MI6 extremist head choppers arrived, was because that he presided over a system that was deeply diverse and respected religious and ethnic differences, and ensured harmony between peoples of different faiths and ethnicities. So yes, what Rubio said is a whopper on a grand scale, but I mean, who is remotely surprised at this point? But I mean, I think that actually, yes. It is no surprise, given the different forces with different agendas that helped overthrow Assad, that the country is on the brink of civil war. The HTS have assisted this by effectively disarming themselves, allowing themselves without response or defense to be blown to shit by Israel, which is encroaching further illegally into Syrian territory in the Golan, to the point where they are terrifyingly close to Damascus now, the IOF forces. But at the same time, I mean, while yes, Syria's balkanization might be viewed as a positive outcome from the perspective of the US and the various different forces that have all been kind of chiseling away at Syria for two decades now. At the same time, I actually think that there was a push, particularly from Britain, to basically just replace Assad with HTS, in the hope that the country would be stabilized from their perspective. Obviously, that doesn't mean actual stability, but it would mean a single central governing body with which they could do business, which would break open Syria's vast resources for their rape and pillage, with whom they could cut deals, with who they could directly pressure to recognize Israel. Recently we had the rescission of sanctions on Syria. Yalani openly stated that he would, in return for lifting the sanctions, he would recognize Israel, allow for mass privatization, all of these things that the US and British wanted. So I actually don't necessarily think that a completely balkanized Syria is something that they actually want, or indeed would be a positive thing from their perspective, because it would be it would make the continuing kind of tensions and issues that are present in the former Yugoslavia, it would pale in comparison. Like, we are talking about, this is a country which is full of various different sects, backed by often and militias, backed by different powers, who are armed.
Yeah.
So actually, it wouldn't necessarily make for a bunch of easily exploitable micro states. It would mean perpetual chaos. I mean, to give you the example of Libya, I mean, very early on, after the fall of Gaddafi, the British sought to move in, install a pliable puppet government, run its security services, and BP, after having been kicked out of the country by Gaddafi, announced that they were going to start raping Libya's oil and gas reserves anew on favourable terms. But then the country descended into outright chaos, and it's only now, almost 15 years later, that there is a relative level of stability that allows for exploitation of Libya's resources by Western powers. So it's, I think that, what with Yolani's smiling grinning podcasts with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, and all of his meetings with Western officials. I do think that they saw the least bad. The Western powers saw the least bad option here as just replacing wholesale Assad's administration with HTS. But the problem is that HTS doesn't have the legitimacy or authority to govern a small shred of the country, let alone we mentioned Afghanistan. It was well understood, and I've reported on this based on leaked files. Throughout the 20-year occupation, Britain and America understood that outside of Kabul, at a push even, the central government had no authority whatsoever.
Yes.
And I think that it is the same problem. They're facing the same problem now, a civil war in Syria is likely to last a very long time, and it could serve to drag the various countries that have been involved in removing Assad further into yet another quagmire. So we shall see.
Well, you shared on your Twitter a clip from a former US ambassador who is essentially engaged in the business of should we say, doing a makeover on al-Jawlani. So should we play this for the audience to show them what kind of trickery has been engaged in here? So just going to cue this up now and play.
So, starting in 2023, a British non-government organization which specializes in conflict resolution invited me to help them bring this guy out of the terrorist world and into regular politics. And at first, I have to tell you, I was very leery of going. I sort of had images of me in an orange jumpsuit with a knife to my throat. But after talking to several people who had gone in, and one of whom had met him, I decided to take the chance. And so the first time I met him, this guy's name is nom de guerre was Abdulkader Jolani, but his actual name is Ahmed Shara, which he only revealed to the world after he captured Damascus in the Blitzkrieg of December 2024, about 5 months ago. First time I met him, I sat down next to him, and I'm literally as close as I am to Roy, and I said, this is all in Arabic, I said, never in a million years could I imagine that I would be sitting next to you.
Right. So I think that demonstrates the point adequately, which is this guy was brought in by, quote, a British non-governmental organization, which to me says Ministry of Defense, MI6 funded, basically front organization, which is used to interact with these characters and maybe actually run these characters on behalf of Britain. That seems to me that Jolani Shara, whoever he is at least a medium-term British project, isn't he? I've lost your sound, mate.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I muted myself, so I didn't interrupt the video. Excuse me. When the second that the words British non-governmental organization specializing in conflict resolution were uttered, I knew exactly who he was talking about, which is ARC, which is an MI6 cutout, and it's run by a veteran MI6 officer called Alistair Harris. They were heavily involved in marketing the moderate opposition. They ran vast propaganda programs trying to manufacture Western consent for regime change. They ran domestic propaganda targeting Syrians of all ages, trying to turn them against the Assad government. They are heavily implicated in the staging of chemical weapons attacks, and they gave birth to groups like the White Helmets and the Free Syria Police, who featured prominently in their propaganda. Now, as I wrote for the Grey Zone, not long after Assad's fall, there's a number of leaked documents related to ARC and Global Strategy Network, which was another British intelligence cutout founded by Richard Barrett, who is an ex-MI6 dude who ran the agency's torture program for a while. But anyway, the point is that what I found very, very interesting about a series of leaked documents in my possession is these files make a large number of references to Britain running secret programs which are supposed to undermine the appeal of HTS. But actually, frequently, it appears that these programs ended up helping HTS. So, for instance, there is an excerpt in one file which notes that HTS and other extremist armed groups are significantly less likely to attack opposition entities that are receiving support from the British government. Okay. Now, the reason for that, and I mean, we could just say, well, that it's because they knew they were being run by the British, and they themselves were being run by the British, so that's why they left them alone. It could be more complex than that, and a reason that they might have left the White Helmets and Free Syria Police alone was because by token of these organizations providing aid and support to the populations of opposition occupied territory and effectively operating as parallel governance structures, they enhanced the credibility of HTS as a governance actor. So it's like when Britain, so you have the White Helmets, who are, a fire and rescue service. You have the Free Syria Police, who were, working with al-Nusra and helping women get stoned to death because they wore the wrong clothing. And then you have, Britain created an ambulance service and hospitals for the Syrian opposition. So HTS could point to all this stuff and say, well, look, you're as good as living in a fully fledged state. You should accept us as your rulers, which seems to have happened in the areas that they were active in. And then you also have this relentless stream of propaganda about the joys of life in opposition occupied territory, which is created by these same agencies. So to give you an example, at Global Strategy Network, and one of their leaked files that I reported on, they boast about how when the Iranian general Soleimani was killed in I believe it was January 2020 in a US drone strike, they very quickly produced a wide variety of clips of Syrians in opposition occupied territory celebrating, which went viral on social media and got shared by people like Mike Pompeo, right? So it's like, we have to ask ourselves, if these operations were truly intended to undermine HTS, how did they end up helping them consistently? While undermining, delegitimizing, and demonizing the Assad government, Iran, and Russia. Well, the actual saviors of Syria. Right?
Isn't that funny how it always works out that way? I mean, one might draw the comparison with the de-radicalization programs run by the British government domestically, which seem to actually produce more lone wolf assassins and various different who commit various different terrorist incidents in domestically. Then they are one of the most reliable, it would seem, jihadist training centers, and this is one of the things that when you're observing these incidents, you have to get your head around what the British government uses for titles for something are literally the opposite of what it actually does. So de-radicalization centers create assassins. NGOs and humanitarian organizations fund roving gangs of Salafists. Anti-slavery organizations work to create slave states, in the case of like Libya. This is the game that is constantly played. And this is the language game that is used by the British ruling class to justify their operations in a place like Syria by dressing it up in this humanitarianism, when in actual fact, what they're doing is they're empowering the most violent, reactionary, utterly despicable forces they can possibly find to try and run a state for them, which at the moment isn't going very well.
Well, which is, I mean, pretty consistently not going very well. I mean, and it's like, I mean, on that subject, I think just to round this out, I mean, there is, I mentioned the example of Libya. A key component of the regime change operation in Libya, which has been rather forgotten about now, is that a large number of Libyan Islamic fighting group operatives who were, I mean, this is an Al Qaeda affiliate that was anti-Gaddafi. When the UK was cozying up to Gaddafi, LIFG members living in the UK, which included Salman Abedi, the Manchester bomber, and his family, they were subject to control orders which banned them from talking to each other or leaving. It was effective house arrest. The second that fighting broke out in Libya in 2011, all of these restrictions were lifted. They were given their passports, and MI5 ensured their safe passage to Libya. Okay, on top of that, a large number of LIFG fighters had been released due to the work of the Quilliam Foundation, which was the world's first counter-extremism think tank. It was created by British intelligence and given open British government funding, which was subsequently judged to be a mistake. And a well-placed source told the journalist Ian Cobain, we should have run it through the agencies. They do this sort of stuff all the time and nobody ever finds out. The Quilliam Foundation negotiated the release from prison in Libya of LIFG fighters who then went on to take down Gaddafi. Now, this was conducted under the auspices of a countering violent extremism program, which raises the very obvious question of whether the ultimate objective of counter-extremism programs run by London is to create the right kind of sleeper army that can be activated to stir up trouble if and when the context requires. It seems like a fairly obvious deduction.
Yes. Just to mention something that we will probably go into more next week, but to bring this up at this point, didn't the actor Stephen Yaxley Lennon have an association with the Quilliam Foundation for a while?
Yes. Tommy Robinson, or Stephen Yaxley Lennon, which is his real name. He, after running the EDL, the English Defence League, which was a bunch of soccer hooligans who had a bizarre affinity for Israel. I'm sure it's just a giant coincidence. He supposedly de-radicalized thanks to an intervention from Quilliam, and he subsequently said that Quilliam basically offered to pay him £2,000 per month to credit them for him leaving the EDL. He has suddenly he has abruptly resurfaced from prison, having been at the forefront of the race riots at the end of last year. I wonder why he suddenly re-emerged now.
Well, given that my interpretation of his career is that he is a British state asset moved around this particular chessboard at the whims of his masters in London, I'm sure that somebody in the British state system has a purpose for him this summer, which is why he has been released. And I think this is probably a good place to sort of draw our discussion to a conclusion for today, which is that the fate of Starmer and the fate of the actor Stephen Yaxley Lennon are in some ways sort of tied together, because both fundamentally are assets of the people who actually run Britain. Starmer more high profile, Yaxley Lennon more from, or presented as if he is just from the football terraces. The actor Stephen Yaxley Lennon, he is a sort of an operation that is, again, run by British intelligence, I would say probably MI5 especially, and his job is to be the face of various different violent incidents. And the purpose of these violent incidents isn't to usher in like the Fifth Reich or something in Britain. Like the British ruling class don't need that kind of Führer figure just right now, but it's to scare people. It's to place divisions within the British working class, and also to frighten liberals that the Fifth Reich is on the way and that Yaxley Lennon is going to head it up. And therefore, we need more repressive laws right now to counter this extremism. But think of everything that Kit and I have been saying, not just in this episode, but multiple episodes, and the reporting that you've done over so-called counter-extremism programs and British intelligence operations. They don't prevent extremism. They don't prevent terrorism. They don't prevent fascism and racism. They foster it and they use it. And if they want an army of pre-trained Salafists ready to go to hit various West Asian and African countries, well, the same purpose can be applied here to their fostering of and their keeping of fascists on the payroll. It's there. They're there to do a job for them. And when Mr. Yaxley Lennon has done his job of probably creating some more riots this summer, scaring people so that the government can bring in even more repressive legislation, they'll find some criminal shit that he's done, that he probably has done, and they'll throw him back in jail again, ready for usage the next time they want to roll something out. That's his purpose. His purpose and Keir Starmer's purpose is fundamentally the same. One gets to be prime minister. The other one gets to do some nasty cocaine and spend a lot of time in jail. They're all working for the same people, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, what was it Starmer said? Stepping up, not standing down. I think that's what Mr. Lennon is doing himself. But yes, no, that seems like a good note to end on. Again, a fantastic show. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. We are hoping to do more specials on specific topics in the very near future, and hopefully get some exciting guests on. So stay tuned. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.
See you soon, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.